Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 DocLands Documentary Film Festival. I'm Kelly Clement from the programming team, and I'm here with Director Alex Pritz to talk about his film, The Territory, which premiered at Sundance 2022, where it won both the Audience Award and a special jury award for documentary craft, making it the only film at that year's festival to win awards in both the jury and the audience categories. So the Territory, just want to bring this up. The Territory is also being included in the DocLands education program so that high school students will also be tuned into this powerful documentary. So welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, everybody who watched.
Where are you coming from today?
I'm in Sun Valley at the Sun Valley Film Festival.
Oh, nice. How is the weather like?
It's great. It's beautiful, fresh air. Yeah, really wonderful time.
Wow. Well, let's just dive right in. You know, I've seen so many docs about the destruction of the Amazon rainforest, but this one is one of the most powerful and effective ones that I've seen because it presents many different perspectives on the issue, from indigenous peoples to settlers to loggers, who are all depicted as human beings with hopes and dreams, whether right or wrong. It's very unusual. And as one of your main subjects says, the Amazon is not just the heart of Brazil, but the whole world. So how did this filmic journey all begin? What inspired you to tell the story of this particular slice of the Amazon?
For me, this story started through Nadinha, the activist in the film. I had really admired and felt inspired by the work that she was doing. You know, she's this larger than life character in some ways. She's the godmother of environmental protection in the Western Amazon. And so just felt really inspired by her work, but also saw, given the political winds in Brazil, that her work was going to become a lot more difficult if Bolsonaro was elected. And so began a conversation with her, and through our producer, Gabriel Uchida, who's very close with her and in Brazil, began a conversation and began filming. And then through her was introduced to the Uruguay community, who obviously became a really large part of the film. And the idea of also then including these settlers and farmers who are engaged in the destruction of the rainforest came largely through Bitate and Nadinha, who said, we've done a lot, as you said, there's been a lot of reports about the Amazon, and journalists come in every other month, and we'll take them around to see the deforestation. We give them the same interview every time, and they leave with a fairly similar report every time. And we don't see much change here on the ground. So if you want to understand the source of this violence and the cause of this destruction, go talk to the people that are out there with chainsaws. Like, it's not us doing this. And so that began this kind of multi-headed approach at trying to understand this really complex situation.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did you first, though, decide to go to South America? I know that you've been a cinematographer on many different films and in all different parts of the world. What brought your focus to South America?
I studied environmental science, studied geography, environmental science, and the Amazon is a huge ecosystem. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about jungles in my undergraduate research, and so the protection of the Amazon is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And through Nadinha and conversations with her and her work, decided if this is going to happen, if Bolsonaro has a chance of being elected, let's go and let's see what happens. And it was really, one foot in front of the other. We didn't set out to make a feature film, thought maybe it would be a short, and things just kept moving, and we had to keep filming.
Yeah. Well, as you kind of waded into this, what was your first impressions of how this was playing out with all the different elements?
I think, as soon as Bolsonaro came into office, we saw a really sharp turn in the tone and level of activity coming from these people that were invading indigenous land. That first invasion that you see in the film is really just 10 days after Bolsonaro is elected, and Nadine makes that phone call, and the guy says, look, we're shit in the water. What are we going to do? And Nadine had pushback from the government before, and she's got this kind of love-hate relationship with the authorities, where she's always asking them for their help, but and bugging them to do things. Oftentimes they're reluctant, and she does the work of the government a lot of the time. But this felt like a whole new level of vacuum of power, absence of rule of law as soon as that inauguration took place.
Did you have some kind of shape to this film, or did you just dive right in?
We dove right in. The shape to the film. That's a good question.
It would be easy enough to just concentrate on the Iruwawa.
Right. Yeah, I think I was interested in speaking to the farmers and the people on the other side, and I knew that Bitate and Nadine were. I think in order to understand this conflict in a way that's not just going to lead to more kind of black and white solutions that end up oftentimes exacerbating the conflict for the people on the front lines, it's important to, as vehemently as I disagree with the actions of these settlers and farmers, trying to understand their motivations was an important part of our process. That answers your question.
And that's a very rare perspective that we see in the films. How did you get in touch with these farmers and settlers, and how did you convince them to participate?
That interview that one of them gives about halfway through the film, where he says, nobody can control us, only God can control us. Of course, we're out there burning the land. I had seen that interview because it was on local news, and tried to track them down and got a hold of them over Facebook and went out to meet them. They are extremely skeptical of the media. They feel like the media has maligned them, and they really see themselves as like the pioneering heroes of their own story. For a long time, they were celebrated as that. The Brazilian government encouraged people like Sergio and Martins to go out and cut down the rainforest. There was a kind of 40 acres and a mule policy, where if you cut down a certain amount of the rainforest, you could own that and then farm it, because the Brazilian government wanted the rainforest cleared. And within Sergio's generation, that's changed really dramatically. And there's a new constitution in Brazil, 20, 30 years ago, 30 years ago, there's a sweeping set of changes that have criminalized a lot of the activities that they consider to be, really admirable. And so, I think understanding that really helped, so that, weren't just trying to castigate them as these pure criminals, but people who were put into a situation where, their best option was to engage in this criminal activity, but also understanding that there's this engine and this huge economic apparatus that's pushing them into those situations. I think, outside of the film, once the credits roll, it's important to talk about the fact that there's a whole business of large landowners in Brazil that gobble up huge amounts of land and push small farmers like Sergio and Martins into this really desperate position of having to go out and colonize new land, which then inevitably within a few years gets sold back to those same mega ranchers that were pushing them to the margins to begin with. I think like understanding the larger context that they're in, and being appreciative of that, and not just trying to paint them in a one size fits all manner, but also being American and being white, I think bought me a certain amount of trust. They have this admiration and love of the American West, and these ideas of manifest destiny and expansion of the colonial frontier it's the ideological gas in their tank. It's what's driving them forwards. And I, as an American, I recognize all of that. That's the same national mythology that our country was built on, and the genocide against indigenous people in this country was driven by. And so, I think seeing those echoes of my own country and the national mythology here allowed me to access different parts of their understanding of their own position that other people might not have.
Yeah. Well, it's what's still going on in our country.
Absolutely. Yes. Not an issue. I certainly don't want people in, San Francisco or here in Sun Valley or anywhere to look at this film and say, oh, that's a horrible thing that's happening over there in Brazil. It's absolutely not. It's a really similar story to what has happened and continues to happen here.
Were they concerned on how they would be depicted? I'm sure when you first contacted them and started your initial interviews, were they worried?
Yeah, I think everybody was worried about me. Vitate, the Utara Wow, everybody's like, who's this guy? What's this guy up to? But it was a long, slow film. We started in 2018 and developed some real relationships with everybody involved. And I think my North Star as a director, as somebody who's out there shooting, was that any individual who's depicted in the film should be able to look at their depiction in the film and say, that is me. Yeah, that is representative of my situation. And I think that's true of Sergio. I think that's true of Vitate. That's true of everybody in the film. And so that as long as we've done that, I feel accountable to the people I was working with and feel good about the way that it was made.
Great. Well, yeah, in fact, it even makes me want to see a film about Sergio, what his life is like and how he's progressing.
Yeah. Maybe somebody else will make the sequel. Vitate can make that sequel. Yeah.
But just to go off on another direction, I was particularly drawn to this new young leadership of the indigenous community and their dedication to fighting for their land and life. And Vitate, especially this young man, only 20 years old, becoming the leader of the community.
Yeah, he's an incredibly impressive human being with an enormous weight of responsibility on his shoulders. And when we first met Vitate, same as me, people were skeptical of Vitate within the community, and weren't sure that he was up to the task. He was a kid. He was 18 when he first became leader, and it was just so wonderful to watch him grow and develop as a leader into this extremely capable, caring, responsible person who's I feel fully confident in his ability to lead this community into the future. That scene where he arrests the invader and they sanitize his hands and everything. That was the scene that we'd been looking for a long time. Where he really takes charge of the situation and acts as a leader. And it just felt so fitting as well that was then filmed also by him and his community. Not only is the action taking place on camera, this climactic moment of leadership, but the fact that they were documenting it themselves and it happened through their own eyes just felt like a real gift to the creative process.
Yeah, it was amazing the way you documented how they discovered the use of technology and the power of the camera, and especially the drones. That was a process that you were witness to.
Yeah, it's been a real transformation, but I think it's also important to say that Vitate's interest in technology predated me or my involvement in the community. He is independent of this film, a technologically savvy, extremely astute young man. And so when COVID happened and we were, shut out from the community, responsibly so, we saw an opportunity to kind of add to the evidentiary work that they were doing with film, this more artistic, expressive side, and began working with them to begin filming themselves.
Well, do you think this is the use of technology is something that could spread to other tribes that are fighting for their land?
Yeah, there's a huge movement in Brazil around this, in the Munduruku territory, the Yanomami. There's lots of different Indigenous artists, creating their own media, creating their own films already. And so we're really excited about supporting Bitate and Tangai, my co-cinematographer, and everybody else, in the community that's interested in building a multimedia center of production, center of excellence within their territory. We've been meeting with other Brazilian and Indigenous filmmakers and working on workshops and knowledge exchanges that can happen. So excited for the road forwards. And, hopefully DocLands 2023, you'll see Bitate directing his own film. I won't even be involved.
I thought that would open up a new career for you.
Yeah. Very well.
Now, I'm not sure if I pronounced her name right. Nidatha?
Nadinia. Yeah.
Nadinia. Nadinia. Is she still active in the area?
Yes, she is as active as ever. That woman is fearless, and yeah, the walls and the barbed wire has not set her back an inch. She's extremely active, and her daughter, Chai Surui, is actually becoming a really impressive young activist. She's 25, she's Indigenous. She spoke at COP26, gave the opening address to world leaders there, and really excited to continue to support their whole family.
Is she still receiving violent threats about her work?
They are pretty constant. Yeah. I mean, that phone call that we were there and captured, that happens a couple times a year. In addition to text messages or the person who sits behind you in line at the bank and says, "Oh, you're Nadinia, aren't you? You live here, don't you? You should probably be quiet." And it's just this insidious cloud of fear mongering that exists all around her, trying to keep her silent about these issues. And to her credit, she does not give a damn.
Yeah, that's very obvious in there. But there is danger. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, whatever I experienced in the making of this film was nothing compared to what Bitate, Tangai, and the people living in these Indigenous communities on the border of these extremely, surrounded by hostile neighbors. It's a constant threat to them.
And it just doesn't seem like any solutions to that.
I think, political instability, this is an election year in Brazil, and political instability creates the conditions for violence to go uninvestigated and unanswered. And so, making sure that this election in Brazil does not go off the rails is really important to the community. But it's a constant threat. I mean, in the making of the film, obviously Ari was killed. And since we wrapped production, another member of the Uruguay community was murdered as well. And so, it's a constant threat. It's a horrible situation right now.
Do you have any predictions for the upcoming election? Do you see anything in the horizon? Any hope?
I think that that's
that's a loaded
question within a question there. Yeah. I think there's a chance for Brazilians to elect a number of Indigenous women who have put forward their names as candidates in Congress. I would love to see more Indigenous representation within Brazil. I think that'd be really exciting. I'd love to see the same thing in the United States. And, I hope that whoever wins the election, that they enforce the rules that are on the books. Brazil has relatively strong environmental protections on paper. And, the slashing of budgets for environmental agencies and, the appointment of military personnel at the heads of environmental agencies, none of that helps at all. And you've seen it in the numbers. Deforestation has skyrocketed under Bolsonaro. And, in the 90s, deforestation went down. There are political levers that we can pull and ways that we can address this situation that do make a difference on the ground. And they're just not being invested in correctly right now.
Well, that's hopeful.
Yeah. Hopefully, that should be there. There are ways to work on this. In the US, there's a The forests bill is coming through the White House soon, which could ban any products related to deforestation supply chains from entering the United States. There's a similar bill in the EU. I think sending election monitors to Brazil this year would be a really good step. The election's on October 2nd. But yeah, Brazil, the number of land defenders in Brazil that have been killed so far this year is, I don't have the number on the top of my head, but it's increased over this time last year again. So the trends are not getting better.
Well, I guess that's a good entry to ask how people who've watched this, how can they get involved?
That's a great question too. I think, for those of us that are in the United States, I think it's important to think about, the native groups in the land that we all inhabit now. Looking into the land back movement, there's a strong effort to repatriate stolen native land here in the United States. And that's worth thinking really critically about and getting involved in. Within Brazil, I think supporting Indigenous voices who are creating films and are speaking out on these issues. I think any conversation that has to do with climate change absolutely needs Indigenous voices at the center of that conversation. They've been sidelined for way too long, and they are the best conservatives of the natural world. And I think, on a personal level, it's worth all of us thinking about what ideologies we subscribe to. There's so many different perspectives in this film, but how do we view our relationship to land? Do we see it as a commodity, as private property, as something that we have rights to and dominion over? Or is it something that we have a responsibility to and a duty towards? I'd like to see us, shift our thinking towards protecting the natural world because of everything that it's given us and the wonderful gifts that we've received from it, rather than thinking about what we can take from it.
Yes. Well, let me ask you, just on another subject, how were you able to capture the scale of deforestation in this rainforest? I know there was this micro level going on. There's the macro level of flora and fauna. You did a wonderful job. I just felt in awe of that world. And then there's the aerial level where you can, which is kind of shocking, where you can see what's happening. You can see the distinct lines of forest and desert. How did you capture that?
Yeah, I think, I was so drawn to the maps of this region because it's so clear what is Indigenous land and what isn't. Where there is forest, it is Indigenous land. Where there isn't, it's private property. And were it not for these Indigenous groups bravely defending what's left of the Amazon rainforest, we wouldn't have it, and our planet would be in a way worse situation. Climate change would be affecting all of our lives in horrific ways. And so, seeing these political lines play out in ecological terms so clearly was really interesting to me. At the same time, I knew that we wanted our film to live in real time, up close to the characters, and then kind of get into their nuanced and textured lives. And so we developed this kind of, visual vernacular where most scenes exist at eye level, sort of handheld, fluid cinematography. But we occasionally kind of drill down into one insect or one small patch of the rainforest and the different relationships that exist within it, and then pull out and try to understand the scope of what's being lost, on a continent to continent scale, just how much of the rainforest is being destroyed. And so that kind of left us with what I hope is, a story that's intriguing and draws you in on a personal level, but then is able to kind of pull you in or out of these different layers.
You did a good job on that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Now, have your subjects seen the film?
Oh yeah, Bitate, Nadinia, everybody from the Uruguay community has seen it. Within the Uruguay, maybe it comes across a little bit in the film, but culturally they don't like to speak about people after they've died. people are buried with their belongings, and they don't keep many images of people at all. And so we've shown certain parts of Ari's family, asked not to see it, and of course we totally respect that. We showed them versions of the film that didn't have those scenes with him in it. Everybody else in the community has seen it. Itete has been traveling with me to festivals. It's been amazing.
Oh, wonderful.
And on the other side, I have no idea where Martins is right now. He's probably off doing the same thing in another part of the Amazon. Sergio has seen all of the parts of the film that he's involved in. That was important to me, that, if we're treating for using objectivity as part of the way that we're presenting ourselves. And it was, we said to everybody we were shooting with, we are filming with all sides of this story. You are not the only perspective in it. And we had to be really honest with everybody involved in the film about what we were doing, because for security reasons as well. If we were found to be misrepresenting something, it could be really bad for the rest of our team. And as part of that, I also felt a bit of a responsibility to show Sergio certain parts of the film too. And so nobody had editorial input or control over that, but Sergio's seen and feels great about the sections of the film that involve himself.
Great.
Yeah.
And just a little bit about, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, Tanguy?
Tanguy, yeah.
Tanguy, who's listed as one of the cinematographers along with you.
Tanguy is, to his credit, a dedicated teacher. He teaches young students, same as Ari, actually. They were both teachers in different schools, but they worked alongside each other. And so he feels really strongly that he wants to keep teaching, and he has a responsibility to those students. At the same time, we were just in Copenhagen together at the CPH Docs Film Festival, and Tanguy is really excited as well about working on the construction of this multimedia center of excellence, and how we could, or he could integrate that with the curriculum that he's working on in the schools. So yeah, I think, any number of possibilities, but both my parents are public school teachers too. So I'm like, I get it, Tanguy, like teaching's really important too. Like, I can't pull him entirely into cinematography, but he's wonderful.
Well, he made a wonderful contribution to the film.
Yeah. And I think, I learned a lot from the way that he shot too. There's a really direct style, a visual style that he brought to those scenes. And it comes across, there's this urgency in the way that you experience when he takes over the cinematography. And I just feel really grateful to have been able to work with him.
Wow. Well, what's next for you?
Oh man. We're really focused on the impact campaign right now. It's going to be a multi-year thing, thinking about legislative goals, thinking about how to strengthen and fortify the Indigenous storytelling initiatives that exist within Hundonia. So yeah, I think that's going to be my focus for the foreseeable future, as well as trying to spread the word about the territory and get people to think more about this climate crisis that's bearing down upon us.
Where can people see the territory?
We are going to have a theatrical release later this year.
In actual theaters.
In actual theaters, yes. Come see it. Our sound design team will be so happy if you come see it in theaters, and so will I. And yeah, we'll be in theaters later this year, and then we'll be on Disney Plus after that. So it'll be widely available all over the world.
Wonderful. So how did Darren Aronofsky get involved in this? Because he's mainly known for narrative films. How did he get involved in this documentary out in the Amazon?
Darren got involved really early, actually. He was the first, production company to come on and support the film. I had just gotten back summer of 2019 from filming that burning season there. I don't know if you remember, but it was really, it hit the news in a big way that Sao Paulo went dark for a day because of the smoke from these fires in the Amazon migrating south. And so I had returned with a lot of footage and met with some of the folks from Protozoa Pictures, his company, at IFP Week, like one of these speed dating things that new filmmakers like me that don't have any connections go to and try to like, hey, I'm making a film, come support me. And they did, and they were like, totally got it. And they were really excited about the film and understood what we were trying to do with, a story that was being told in real time, and, up close, and then, brought hard drives and stuff to Darren's office and looked at footage with their team and looked through daily stuff and talked about story. And one of the things that I think Darren really helped with early on was finding a sort of narrative structure, like you mentioned earlier. There's this way that the film could have turned into a sort of cliche Western, cowboys and Indians or something. Would be a really easy trope to fall into. But Darren, and I discussed about how we could take that formula and that structure, but then subvert it in some really key ways. Like, in the traditional Western, one of the really problematic things, I think, is that Indigenous groups are often these nameless, faceless, homogenized entities on the horizon. And you get these richly textured lives of the settlers who are complex, individuals with multiple layers. And it was an easy flip to make in this, because it's the reality is that like the interesting, sophisticated, savvy people are Bitate and his community, who understand what's going on and know how to use media and understand the effect of their territory on the rest of the climate. And the naive ones in our story, the people that don't understand the scope or history of what they're doing, are these settlers. And so trying to find ways of taking, this formulaic genre in some senses, and using the aesthetics of it, but flipping the narrative tropes on their head. That was one of the early ideas that came through him, and obviously then became much more involved in the edit and post-production, all this other stuff. But yeah,
that was really special, and
I
especially not making it good versus evil.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have been able to work with them.
Yeah. Do you have any other film projects in mind right now?
Oh, man. I do, but email me about them.
Okay.
I want to say one here, but yeah.
Well, just to know they're there.
They are. Yes.
Okay.
Working on two stories I'm really excited about. One about a space program in a developing country, and another one that's partially animated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for joining us and for making this film. It's wonderful.
I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who watched and, stayed and listened or whatever. We really appreciate it.
Are you coming out for the festival?
We are talking about it. It's a pretty packed schedule, but I'd really like to be able to make it out there. We've got some support from like the Catapult Fund and some other really wonderful San Francisco-based organizations. So it would be a trip I would love to make.
Great. Looking forward to meeting you someday.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Great.